One, two, three, four.
You are listening to SKYLIT, the SKYLIT Books podcast. SKYLIT Books is a general interest bookstore in the Los Feliz neighborhood in Los Angeles. You can shop with us from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. or visit us online 24/7 at skylitbooks.com. Follow along at SKYLIT Books Instagram and Twitter. You can subscribe to the podcast on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Thank you for listening, and now on to the episode.
Hello, my beautiful listeners, and welcome to SKYLIT. This is the SKYLIT Books podcast, and I'm your host, Lance Morgan. Today, I'm so excited to welcome Cass Sunstein, author of the book SLUDGE, What Stops Us from Getting Things Done and What to Do About It. Before we start, I want to remind you that SKYLIT Books is currently open while we are following the current CDC mandate, so please don't forget to bring your masks when you come in. But other than that, come on by and just be respectful of both the employees and the customers around you. Our website is also available for online ordering and to either ship the books to you or pick them up in store. Cass R. Sunstein is currently the Robert Walmsley University Professor at Harvard. He is the founder and director of the program on behavioral economics and public policy at Harvard Law School. In 2018, he received the Holberg Prize from the government of Norway, sometimes described as the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for Law in the humanities. In 2020, the World Health Organization appointed him as chair of its technical advisory group on behavioral insights in sciences for health. From 2009 to 2012, he was administrator of the White House Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, and after that, he served on the President's Review Board on Intelligence and Communications Technologies and on the Pentagon's Defense Innovation Board. Mr. Sunstein has testified before congressional committees on many subjects, and he has advised officials at the United Nations, the European Commission, the World Bank, and many nations on issues of law and public policy. He serves as an advisor to the Behavioral Insights team in the United Kingdom. Mr. Sunstein is author of hundreds of articles and dozens of books, including Nudge, Improving Decisions About Health, Wealth, and Happiness, Simpler, The Future of Government, The Ethics of Influence, Republic, Impeachment, A Citizen's Guide, The Cost-Benefit Revolution, On Freedom, Conformity, How Change Happens, and Too Much Information. He is now working on a variety of projects involving the regulatory state sludge, fake news, and freedom of speech. Hi, Cass. It's so great to have you on.
Hi, it's a great pleasure to be here.
No problem. I'm so excited for this. It's going to be such a great podcast. I read the book. I read about the book, and I just when we first found out we were having you on, and I was like, wow, this is going to be a great episode. I'm very, very excited to talk about this because this is such an important issue.
Okay, well, I'll read a little bit, if I may, from the book.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'll keep it in a way that is focused on the highlights.
Yeah, for sure.
So if you look at a definition of sludge, you might find the following: thick, soft, wet mud or a similar viscous mixture. So I'm going to be talking about a viscous mixture of the sort that we face in life when we deal with friction or burdens or barriers that separate us from, let's say, a good relationship to a cell phone company, a return on a product that doesn't work, a benefit from the government, medical help, or something else. And I can explain this, I think, by a story, a tale, and then by a number. So the story comes from not long ago when I asked students at a large university about the healthcare that they received. I asked them what could make their healthcare plan better. Two of them in a small group singled out the problem of mental health. They said that to make an appointment for a mental health problem, they had to make a bunch of phone calls and fill out a lot of paperwork. They added that the problem of mental illness is stigmatized, and when you're suffering, the last thing you want to do is handle a lot of phone calls and complicated paperwork. One of them said that after a world of frustration, she decided she couldn't handle the sludge. She gave up. That's my story. The number is 11.4 billion. That's the number of hours of federal paperwork mandated by the US government. 11.4 billion hours. That's imposed on patients, on doctors, on nurses, on truck drivers, on small business operators, on people seeking to get money that they're legally entitled to so they can get educated, on people who are trying to run some kind of operation that might employ lots of people, on people who are trying to get employed. Let's pause, shall we, over that 11.4 billion hour figure. If we took every resident of Chicago and said for all of next year, everyone in Chicago has to spend 40 hours a week doing one thing, filling out federal forms, by the end of those 365 days, the 2.7 million residents of Chicago will not have come within 4 billion hours of the annual paperwork burden placed by the US government on Americans. In all likelihood, your life, and I'm speaking to you, listener, has been made worse because of sludge. Frictions that prevent you from doing what you want to do or from going where you want to go. In many cases, sludge imposes economic harm. In other cases, it damages health. In the worst cases, it kills, literally. It cripples economic growth. It decreases employment and stifles innovation. It hurts parents, teachers, doctors, employees, customers, investors, inventors, and developers. It compromises fundamental rights, including the right to vote and the right to be free from discrimination on the basis of race and sex. It's a pervasive source of inequality in our society. Sludge is also an assault on human dignity. Confronting it and having to overcome it creates a sense of humiliation. If sludge stops you from voting or from getting a license to do business, you might feel as if you don't count. People who don't have a lot of money struggle with sludge. It hurts every one of us. It hurts Bill Gates. But if you are sick, old, disabled, or poor, or if you don't have a lot of education, sludge is a curse. It's everywhere in our lives. The good news is that as part of the response to the COVID pandemic of recent months, more than that, over a year, the US waged a war on sludge. Hardly anyone noticed, but it happened. Let me pause for a moment, if I may, while we're recording and ask my The good news is that as part of the response to the COVID pandemic, and there isn't a lot of good news there, but here is some, the US waged a war on sludge. Most people didn't notice, but it happened. For example, telemedicine was authorized widely by the Department of Health and Human Services. Instead of face-to-face visit requirements, telemedicine was allowed. The Internal Revenue Service backed off on a requirement that people have to file tax returns to qualify payments under a law that gave them a right to payments. Instead, under public pressure, the Department of Treasury reversed course and said that Social Security recipients would receive the money automatically. Under a program formerly known as food stamps, involving supplemental nutrition assistance, people have long had to complete in-person interviews to be approved for benefits. The United States Department of Agriculture waived that requirement. It gave blanket approval to states to give out benefits to people who are entitled to them, even without an interview. Every year is a good year for a war on sludge, but in the context of a pandemic, administrative burdens are clearly going to cause hardship. Sludge removal might not seem the highest priority in a period of pandemic or in other periods, but it can make all the difference between relative comfort and acute hardship. And in the last year plus, that's been very obvious. True, it's a stretch to see sludge reduction as a complement to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but it's not all that much of a stretch. All over the world, nations should be making an aggressive across-the-board attack on sludge to increase jobs, to promote education, to promote voting, to allow people to get license and permits, and to protect public health. In the last year, we have, I think, a clear answer to a very time-honored question, which is, what is the most precious commodity that human beings have? That's often asked. What's the most precious thing we have? In the context of what people have struggled with, including for many of us, the loss of loved ones, the answer to the question, I think, is more straightforward than it's typically been. The answer to the question, what's the most precious commodity we have, is a four-letter word, and it's a condition for everything else: time. Let's find, shall we, ways to give fellow members of the human race more of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Cass. That was great. And everything you said there just resonated very hard, especially after this past year. No, this book, it was something that, like, when I first read up on it, it's something everyone deals with. It's something I've seen my parents deal with. I had to deal with in adulthood. You see in almost every facet of, like, life now and what you're doing, but you don't think about it, because I feel like there's a sort of, we give up when we think about like the paperwork immediately. It's like embedded in our society to, like, see complicated paperwork and be like, what can I do kind of mentality. So yeah, I was like, wow, this is big. This is a big problem. The first thing I want to talk about is, like, with all of this sludge, with all of these things that deter people from, prospering, basically, how much of it is rooted in, discrimination and, redlining, of course, but, like, redlining from, like, discrimination and classism and all of these isms.
Well, okay, so I worked in the US government under President Obama. I'm working in the US government under President Biden, and I see sludge creation kind of in real time. And often the idea is you want to make sure people who are seeking benefits are entitled to them. So it's completely innocuous and not discriminatory. I say often, I don't say always it's completely innocuous. But often the idea is, if you're going to give people, let's say, economic help, you want to make sure that they have a right to it. And that means they have to fill out forms. Sometimes those forms are extremely hard to navigate for anyone, and especially hard to navigate, let's say, if you're struggling with an illness or old age or poverty. And given the fact that poverty can be correlated with race, and sometimes even illness is correlated with race, there will be a racially discriminatory impact. And often women, and particularly often women of color, are facing disproportionate burdens. They are the bearers of sludge, which means that there will be race and sex discrimination often combined when people have to fill out a lot of stuff in order to get benefits for their kids to which they're legally entitled. So I'm discussing cases where there's no intention to discriminate, but in fact, it's a discriminatory impact. So that's a class of cases. There are other cases where, and these are less lovely than what I've described. What I just described isn't lovely, but I'm going to describe something less lovely. When designers, let's say in state or local government, have a program that is mostly benefiting maybe people of color, but they're not excited about that fact. And they know that if they impose administrative burdens and barriers, long waiting time, let's say, or a questionnaire with 72 questions in it, that it will come down particularly hard on identifiable populations. And they might know that and not hate it, or some of them actually may be okay with it. And the kind of most gripping example I think that we've seen is, at least at some times in places in our country, and I want to bracket the recent years to make it as non-political as possible, but at some points in our country, SLUDGE has been a way of preventing identifiable people from voting. And the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was in part a SLUDGE reduction act, so that things like literacy tests and other things where the real motivation was to prevent identifiable groups from voting, or at least to make it harder for them, that wouldn't happen anymore. It would happen either not at all or much less. So we can go area by area. When companies say, for example, that you have to mail in a form in order to get a rebate, they kind of know that a lot of people aren't going to mail in that form. Right. And there they might think, I don't care from whom I benefit economically. I just want to benefit economically, and I know I'm going to. And there's no discrimination in it. There's just a profit motive, but there's something not good in it, which is the sludge and the benefiting from the sludge. But in other cases, there's knowledge that certain groups are going to be hurt, and people might not mind that, which is, I think, not good. They should mind that. In the worst cases, and this is, I think, the implication of your question is correct, people might like the fact that there's going to be a discriminatory impact.
Well, it seems like, one thing that I have seen from, people close to me and people close to me in this past year, and people who, are surrounded me because because of work, people, especially in the service industry, or people who were, really living paycheck to paycheck, where like things like unemployment was huge. There was a huge rise in unemployment where a lot of people were not able to get it because of paperwork, because of specific terminology and paperwork that they might have gotten wrong. And, it feels for a lot of people unnecessary. You know what I mean? Some of these paperworks, some of the stuff they're filling out feels just like, heavy, just a bunch of like words put in there for no reason. And then there's like the fact that some things are on the computers that people don't have access to. Some of the paperwork they just don't have access to getting. They only hear about it. Or some of the ways to send it in, they might have to go into an office, especially where this year people don't want to, you couldn't really be out as much. How has, the pandemic revealed a lot more of the impact, the social impact of sludge in our society?
It's a great question. So here are two problems with sludge. And let's get to the pandemic in a moment. So you're just a regular person trying to live your life, and to get something from your employer or from the government or for the university, you have to do something, like fill out forms and go somewhere. You might think that's a problem for me because I've got a lot of things to do, and to fill out those forms is not fun and is really hard. And to go to that place, I don't have time for that. So that's the simplest case. But human beings don't calculate. We might think, I'll do it tomorrow, and tomorrow never comes. Or we might think, I want to do what I do most days, and I don't want to do that other thing. The behavioral science word is inertia for this, and human beings benefit or suffer from inertia. And that means we're not calculating machines. We sometimes procrastinate, and we sometimes suffer and benefit from inertia. And procrastination, inertia, and sludge, that's a terrible combination. And then there's one other point, which is that if you are poor or old or sick or busy, there's something that you suffer from, which is you don't have a lot of bandwidth in your life. So if you're struggling, let's say with a heart problem, or with a kid who's sick and maybe you're a single parent, or if you're old and your mind isn't working as well as it used to, or if you're poor and you're just struggling to make ends meet, the idea of handling a bureaucratic nightmare, that's really something out of a Stephen King novel. It's not something that is manageable. It's horror. And you might say, I'm just not going to do it. And if you put together, the first case, just ordinary people are balancing things, the sludge might be unmanageable. Then, given we're even ordinary people, we procrastinate and we might suffer from inertia. Then sludge becomes worse still. And if you're suffering from poverty or old age or real busyness or some sort of disability, then, oh my gosh, the sludge is like a wall between me and something. Okay, that's background. Now think of a pandemic. In the context of pandemic, you have people who are scared, who are in many cases homebound, who in many cases are either sick or near someone who's sick. And I'll confess, I speak personally here. Fortunately, I haven't lost anyone in my family, but I had someone very close in my family who was very sick with COVID for a short time. And I'll add, I was very sick with COVID for more than 2 weeks. Not hospitalized, but crazy sick. Now, if you ask me, and I was a lucky one, I wasn't hospitalized, I wasn't nearly killed, but I was really sick. If you ask me or my family members around that time, fill out forms or go for an in-person interview to get something that maybe is necessary, good luck with that. It might be that you're not really allowed to go out much if you're quarantined. And then maybe you have help from your family, but maybe you don't. And I personalize this. Thank you for your indulgence in that. But what I had is a very small percentage of what many, many, many thousands of people had. And to ask them to navigate sludge to get economic or medical help or educational help or some kind of other help from their employer or university or state or local government or the federal government, that's a bridge too far. And now we're talking about sludge as a very severe problem. And in the worst cases, people die because of sludge. And that's the sense in which the pandemic has put the problem of sludge in extremely sharp relief. I can say that I started the book before the pandemic, but I finished the book during the pandemic, and it energized this particular author.
And from what you're saying too, I feel like it's fostered these deaths and tragedy, and honestly before that too, like just people, not being allowed stuff, the gatekeeping that sludge, emboldens. Like it seems like, I know.
Let me ask my boy to be quiet.
No problem.
Sorry about that.
No problem. So from all these deaths and tragedies caused by the sludge in our system, our societal systems, it seems like it has caused a lot of mistrust in our leaders and our government. But it also seems like eliminating a lot of it, making it easier for access to all of these things would give back some of that trust to the people. We would feel like our government is actually, helping us, being there for us, if they made it easier for us to get access to things. But why is it the case that they're making it harder, making it less accessible?
I should say I'm speaking in my capacity as author, but I am in my day job, I'm working for the government, and a lot of efforts are ongoing to reduce sludge. This is a very serious enterprise by the US government. And the Department of Health and Human Services, it doesn't matter really whether the president is Republican or Democrat along this one dimension, that the people who work there who don't have particular political affiliation have been aware in the context of the pandemic that sludge can be a serious problem. These are people whose job it is to work in that department, who knows what their political affiliation is, but they want their programs to be available. And under circumstances where people are sick and scared and not able to go in person without fear, or maybe they just can't because of their family circumstance, interview requirements have been eliminated, forms simplified, a great deal has been done. Not as much as should be, in my view. But all over our country, people have been taking significant steps toward sludge reduction. And telemedicine is just one example where something that was heavily regulated and pervaded by sludge is at least freed up significantly. Partly because people see, if you're, caring for, let's say, an elderly relative, the idea of going into a doctor's office, it's not that easy. And if you can just do what we're doing now and talk to a doctor and say, I got something that hurts on my arm, what should I do about it? And the doctor looks at it and says, oh, looks like you have a sprain. I have two things for you to do. It seems small, but it's beautiful, because then the elderly relative isn't left alone. And governments of multiple kinds have been very alert to that. My hope is that we will see at governments at all levels in this country a very sustained effort to scrutinize sludge. I call it sludge audits, but to audit the existing level of sludge and to reduce it where it's not justified. And this is, Rome wasn't built in a day. The war on sludge is, we're having early battles, but my hope and expectation is that if we're all alert to it, even the term sludge itself concentrates the mind. I hope it's a little bit funny as well as a little bit disgusting. And so, as you were saying, if we see that waiting time at some place where things should go quickly, let's say or a driver's license, if it takes 2 hours to get your driver's license rather than just getting it mailed to you, there had better be a reason for that.
Right.
Or if you're trying to get help for some medical problem and the forms you're filling out are incomprehensible and endless and you can't answer them, we should all be able to complain about that. Yeah.
And I mean, it seems like, we should be able to complain and, have our voices heard too, because it's something that, have you seen like an impact from, social media has been very vocal about it. The kids even have been like talking about it on like platforms like TikTok and, especially after everything that happened with the Black Lives Matter movement last year and the AAPI movement this year. And, just people talking about how these forms of these processes have deterred them in a way that it seems like it's like there could be an easier method. Have you seen that push, affect a lot of change too?
Absolutely. So the Office of Management and Budget recently released a report on equity in which it had various findings about equity. And finding number 2 was that administrative burdens are a source of inequity in our society. Now that's very dramatic in its way, in the sense that to see a relationship between administrative burdens and social justice, that's new. I mean, I worked for President Obama. We kind of saw it, but it wasn't something that was that had the degree of centrality that it does now. And I think you're right that the pandemic is, in a way, a spur. Because if you see that, you know, you're a truck driver, even under circumstances of pandemic, and the sludge you have to go through to be a truck driver is making it really hard for you to do your job. You might think, look, I'm kind of a hero here. I'm transporting stuff under circumstances where people need it. And I'm in some ways risking myself. And you're asking me to do this and that, this and that. For people to feel not beleaguered and pathetic, but instead as rights holders when they make that claim, that you're asking me to do that, that's an assertion of dignity.
And it seems like I mean, from the other side of it, it would make, you know, it would be easier as well, because even though the government seems like a machine, it's run by people who, you know, would benefit from less sludge too, because they would, you know, in its rawest form, the government's here to help, right? We're to provide help to the people they serve. It's a service job. And it would be easier to serve people without this barrier as well. So it's a barrier not for one side, it's a two-sided issue there. And like, would you think from the other side, the other side's perspective of it, it would be, you know, beneficial?
Completely. So I think you have a great point, and I'll draw on my experience working for President Obama to give it a little specificity. When I was in the White House, President Obama was quite concerned about administrative burdens and work requirements, and directed me to ask departments of the government that impose the most to reduce. And we didn't want to do something unreasonable, so we asked them to reduce by a certain amount, which we thought was very manageable. And I asked them to come meet in the Roosevelt Room to discuss their plans. And their plans were extremely ambitious, much more ambitious than we had asked for. And I think it's two things. First, if the President of the United States, through his employee, that is yours truly, asks a cabinet department to do something they want to deliver, they don't want to be unresponsive. And also, I think they thought that, look, if we move from paper to electronic, or if we take a form from it has to be filled out quarterly to it has to be filled out annually, or if we make it so that it has 15 questions rather than 50 questions, that makes life easier for us too. That saves us time. Then we only have to deal with the form once a year rather than 4 times a year. And we don't have to reality check all these questions. Or electronic is just less expensive, and it can be maybe very mechanical to process it. So the public officials often are gainers from sludge reduction. I'm thinking now of hospitals and medical care.
Right.
A lot of the cost of medical care in the United States, which is too high, it's because of the administrative burdens that nurses and doctors and hospitals have to bear. And if you cut them, it's good for patients in a couple of ways. First, it's good that the patients don't have to worry about the stuff and give up because the forms are too terrible. I should say, just parenthetically, I have a friend in a European country, which shall go nameless, who just told me this week that she gave up in seeking medical care because in the waiting room, there were too many people and it took hours and hours and hours. That was time sludge. And she thought, I can't be here for 5 hours. She just went home. Now, I hope she's going to be fine, but that shows you the very harmful effect of sludge in medicine. If you reduce the forms and simplify everything, the hospitals and doctors and nurses can spend time dealing with patients and not dealing with forms, and their own expense goes down, and at least some of those savings will be passed on to patients.
And that, I mean, that brings me to another point that sludge is Another point I want to talk about is sludge being, not just paperwork, it's time and it's money, which I feel like, seems like a very, and not to put like it in this specific term, but like kind of insidious thing that sludge does, which is like take away from people who, like, if I am working a job and I'm living paycheck to paycheck, I'm working minimum wage, I can't afford to maybe get a form wrong and face a penalty fee, or maybe, miss this specific form and have to pay this amount of money to catch up. It seems like, or even need like expedite process. There's sometimes a monetary cost to it. Like it seems like, that's a big thing for a lot of people, and that deters them from even trying. There's that sense of lack of trying. How how does that like how does that get to that point for like it to be there? Like even historically, like we were talking about, recently in the past 20-ish years, but historically, how does it lead up to that point where people are just not even bothering with it anymore?
Well, it might be because people think, look, I can spend the next 3 hours enjoying my life or seeing friends, or I can spend struggling with a 7-page form that I can't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And they might think that's not hard. I won't struggle with the long form.
Mm-hmm.
Or they might think I can spend those hours having a good time or facing a problem that I need to face involving my kid, or I can deal with the forms. And they might think, not I'll give up, but I'll do the forms tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And then tomorrow they think the same thing. And the day when they do the forms, that never comes.
Right.
And I'm describing something that sounds a little maybe trivial and silly, but the take-up rate for benefit programs in the United States is often somewhere between 40 and 60%. And I was a literature major, not a math major in college, but if the take-up rate is between 40 and 60%, even I know that the non-take-up rate is between 40 and 60%. That's horrible. That half of the people who are eligible for something aren't getting it. If it's something that might involve helping them get an education, or helping them get job training, or helping them get a license to do something, that 40 to 60%, that's a terrible number. So if we can bring the take-up rate way up, like for Social Security benefits, the take-up rate is very high. So the percentage of people over the age of whatever who don't get Social Security, it's very low. It's because the program's so easy. The level of sludge is tiny once you're eligible. It's just there, basically. And we need to move in that direction for other programs. I'll give you one example, which is the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is something that really changes lives. It helps poor people not only get money, but get healthier and less hungry. And the kids who are beneficiaries of families that have earned income tax credit, they show years later improvements even in what kind of education they get. So it's a great program. Last I looked, the take-up rate for the earned income tax credit was around 80%. Now that's better than 40%, but that means that 1 in 5 of eligible Americans don't benefit from this great program. What are we going to do about that? There has to be an answer to that question. And if we were determined to knock that percentage up from 80, let's say, to 95, we could do that.
And why, fully hypothetically, couldn't we just, enroll the people who needed it? Why couldn't the people who needed to just be enrolled in it? Why do they need to? Because it seems like there is with these forms and processes, a lack of awareness of humanity. We're humans. We're human beings. We falter. We make mistakes. We make errors. One of my favorite lines from a TV show is the reason we all have erasers on pencils is because we all make mistakes. We all make mistakes. We all do these things. But it seems like, there's a lack of awareness in that with a lot of these, with this sludge. Like if I'm late to something, if I'm late to a meeting, if I'm late to the DMV, if I have to go to work, but it's the day before my license expires, stuff like that. So
I
like,
think when you ask this, we're all in a lot of meetings these days on Zoom.
yeah, right.
I've been in a ton of meetings in which really experienced and very smart people forget to press the unmute button.
Right, yeah. That's, I mean, I have been there. I I am one of these people.
Me too, all of us. It's just what
Yeah.
you say about the eraser on the pencil. And the fact that we forget to unmute ourselves is, it's not that we're dumb. It's not that we're confused. It's that we're human. We make mistakes. And your point about automaticity for the earned income tax rate, I'll give you an analogy. And this is something that was done in the Obama administration that I got to be involved in. There's a program that gives poor kids free breakfast and lunch. It's a very widely approved program. So in school, you get a free lunch, free breakfast, and it's nutritious if you're poor.
And I've actually worked in schools who've been a part of that program, and it's amazing.
It's a great program. At one point, it's much better now. The take-up rate wasn't nearly as high as it should be. And the reason was sludge. The parents had to fill out forms. I don't know exactly why the percentage was as not high as it was. And the solution is your solution. And you don't need to know the answer about why exactly it wasn't higher to know what the solution is. It could be that the parents were scared. They got a note from the government. They had to fill it out. No one loves to get a note from the government. Maybe if you fill it out inaccurately, you go to jail. It may be they don't know how to fill it out. It's not the simplest form in the world. It may be they're suspicious. It might be that they were just really busy dealing with other things. So the solution was, it's called direct certification. And it means the kids, if the school or the locality knows the kids are eligible, no one has to fill out any form. They're automatically in.
Right.
And at last count, 15 million kids in the United States were enrolled in direct certification or one of its sibling programs. And that's number 15 million. I confess that that's the only government initiative I got to have some involvement in that I have a hard time talking about without crying.
Wow.
15 million kids. And if we saw pictures of 12 of those kids who are, you know, our fellow Americans who are poor, and who are, you know, their year is going to be much better, and so is their families because they get free school meals. What made that possible? Sludge, in this case, not reduction, sludge removal. They're in.
Right, and I mean, I feel like a big thing we haven't talked about with sludge too is, you know, lack of awareness of stuff. Like something like that, we wouldn't know, like, unless it's like a lot of people don't have the time to know about things. We don't have the time to educate ourselves on, you know, certain terminology and things, and how, like, you know, not all of us are lawyers. We don't know how to read the fine print of stuff too. So like, it's just, I mean, there's so much to it. It's such a big topic. And I mean, that's why, I mean, it's great you wrote a book on this and to like learn more about this.
Book, a large topic and a little book. I wanted the book not to be full of sludge.
Right. And that's a great tagline for it. Short book because I didn't want it to be full of sludge. That's a great way to advertise it. No, I mean, and I want to talk about, you know, something else that's in the title of the book. What do we do about it? What is in even like a hypothetical or hope from you? What is your hope for like taking care of this problem?
So it depends on who we are who are trying to handle the problem. So suppose you have a company. It can be a little company or a big company. It can be a bookstore. You can think, what level of sludge are we imposing on, let's say, employees or on customers? What do they have to do? And is that really justified? So we can do an informal audit, which might involve just seeing in a week our employees, let's say, spending 10% of their time on forms, Are customers spending 10% of their time on forms, or is it less than 1% of their time on forms? If it's anything significant, we can think, how do we cut it? And this isn't hypothetical. There's a lot of work happening at the United Nations, actually, on sludge reduction. This has become an initiative there, and it's something that has gotten a lot of attention in Australia, where people who are working with institutions are thinking, how can we ask what sludge we're imposing and how do we reduce it? If you're in a government, let's say a state or local government, you can think for people who are dealing with you, they might be truck drivers, they might be people who have complaints about city services, they might be victims of domestic violence who are trying to get help, they might be people who are trying to benefits for some program for the elderly. What do they have to do to get the benefit? And to ask, in some way that's a little bit systematic, what does that look like? How many hours? What's a week like for them? And then to think, is that justified?
Right.
I tell you, as I say, I'm speaking as author, not as a public official, but this is all completely public, that the Department of Homeland Security, through the office in charge of immigration, issued a request for information from the public about barriers and burdens in dealing with that institution. So if you're dealing with citizenship and immigration, it might involve a green card, it might involve something else. What barriers and burdens are there? And that document in the Federal Register, which not everyone reads, produced over 7,000 comments. 7,000 comments. That's a lot. Referring to barriers and burdens that the people who wrote the comments thought were excessive. Now, this is an instrument by which we can ask, through whatever means we have, people who are our employees, are our customers, are the people whom we're serving, whatever institution we're in, what are we doing wrong with respect to burdens and paperwork? If a hospital does that, I'll mention a random city. If a hospital does that in Los Angeles, they're going to hear an earful, and some of what they hear is going to be justified, and then they'll probably do at least one thing better.
And I mean, that's the hope, right? That's the hope. That's the dream. That's the dream for like change and the systemic change we were like that everyone, I feel like, it's on the tip of everyone's tongue right now. It's systemic change and hope for a better future, not for us, but for future generations and people to like, for the kids, for the children, for the future children, for them to, have a good future. We have to wrap it up, sadly, but even though I'm having such a great conversation about this, and I could talk about this for hours, but the last thing I want to ask you about, and this is more about the book and you personally, I couldn't imagine writing a book like this without, having an emotional component behind it, having, you're seeing yourself in the light and seeing how you personally are affected by this and have seen people close to you affected by this. How was that process of, being so close to a topic that affects everyone in some way or another? Like, how did you feel like emotionally, your emotional journey throughout it? Yeah, that's it, your emotional journey through it.
Thank you for asking that. The first sentence of the book is, I think this book is a product of a failure. And so it was a product of my own failure when I was in the government the previous go around to do enough to cut sludge. If I had it to do over again, I would have been more ambitious there. And I felt, what was the right word? I felt relieved to be able to say publicly that those who are privileged to serve the public should do better than I did. There was a feeling of relief. Odd, but that's how it felt. Some of the book was really fun to write. So I find the term sludge, which comes from my great co-author, Richard Thaler, who wrote a book called Nudge. And I explored the possibility of writing this book with him. And he said, "Know yourself." I said, "Yes, sir. Yes, boss." But I find the word sludge funny in its vividness. And some of the absurdity of the stories I tell and the fiendishness of use of sludge to get money from people, I found, as well as in some cases tragic, in other cases it's just comical. It's like a TV show where the hero is confounded by sludge and the audience laughs. And I felt that in some of it. So I really enjoyed writing that. Some of it I had a feeling of great optimism and energy. In fact, that was the big feeling of the book, was optimistic energy, that we're going to do something about this. And I was feeling the book doesn't do anything, but if you're lucky, someone reads the book and then something is done.
And that, I mean, what a goal for a book like this. I mean, it's, and also from what you started with, like taking, that responsibility there is not an easy thing to do, but like, I mean, it's something that I feel like more people need to see someone like you who's worked in this field, say that, be able to say something like that you feel this way about. You can look back and look at your own work and feel, I could have done more. I could have seen that. We need more conversations like that, because that humility and honesty is important. It's important for change. We can only grow if we can look back and say, oh, I could have done better, and next time I will. That's how we grow. That's how we all grow. I've done that so many times in my life, and I feel like the best people I know have also done that. So, I just want to say I very much respect and admire that part of that admission there. And thank you for doing that. Thank you for doing that. And I hope in the same way you hope people read the book and learn that. I hope people hear this too and say, you know what, I am going to be as emboldened to look back at my past and ask myself that too. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for coming on the podcast today. This has been, a great episode. I've learned so much, and I hope that the listeners too, who might be in that place of their dealing with their own sludge, can look and see some hope from this podcast, because that's what I think your book does. It's saying there is hope for everyone in this current time and experience that we're having right now. My last thing is, do you have anything you would like to say to the listeners and to the independent bookstore community as a whole?
I do, which is that one of the great founders of behavioral science said that he was an optimist and that it was rational to be an optimist, because if you're a pessimist, you suffer twice.
Wow.
First, when you think about it, second, when the bad thing happens. So for the audience at independent bookstores, I say, let's be optimistic. And also to all of you, profound gratitude that you are foundational to our culture and to our heritage and our highest aspirations.
Wow. No, I'm going to be thinking about that for the rest of my day now. Like, yeah, if you're a pessimistic thing to, I'm sorry. I'm just, you kind of unlocked something for me right there. And no, listeners, go to the SKYLIT right now or to your local bookstore. You'll see Sludge on our podcast display. I know some of you know where it is, but for those who don't, it's going to be right at the front of our main bookstore. Come on in, grab a copy, look through it, and, learn about this. That's so important. That's affected every one of us, or will affect every one of us. And yeah, it's do what the bookstore wants you to do and learn. But yeah, thank you so much, Cass. This has been
Thank you
such a
for your
great
pleasure.
conversation. Really had a great time learning on this podcast episode. And thank you to all the listeners for coming back. I hope you have a beautiful, beautiful, and optimistic day today. Thank you.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylightbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.